Hi, I'm Ben. Today we're going to be chatting with Stelios Kiayias. Together we're going to discuss vendor migrations and building in-house capabilities within product teams. Hi, Stelios.
Yeah, hi Ben. Thanks for inviting me here.
Yeah, it's nice to have you here. So to get started, could you tell us a little bit about what you do?
I am a software engineer at heart, and I have been in this space for around 10 years. Really, the majority of my time was spent working on enterprise level software across on different big companies and working in cross-functional teams within the same country, but in some cases in teams that span across different countries. However, over the last few years, my main focus has shifted to a more of a hands-on consulting role, where I just bring in some expertise around enhancing either the existing engineering culture or fostering a new one. Basically, it's digital transformation. So I'm really into that these days.
To get a bit of an idea of the sort of context we want to tackle, we're particularly interested in product teams once they have reached a certain stage. So generally when they get started, it's all about going fast, about bringing something to the market quickly. Then they realize that they become a bit limited by those previous technical decisions. So is this something that you've experienced and that you've seen happening?
Definitely, this is something that happens, especially in organizations where there is not an established engineering capability. For instance, in one of my recent projects, I'm working on a company that's one of the biggest oil and gas companies in the world. So there is no actual software engineering capability within the company itself. So what's typical in these cases is for a software development agency to be contracted to get started on a product idea, iterate quickly, prove the concept, and then move on to either maintain it or hand over the product back to the company itself. This is where things get a bit more interesting, because it's how do you move from having a vendor where some of the technologies were chosen by them, how do you move from that into handling this in-house as part of your one engineering team?
One thing I'm actually quite interested in, and that you mentioned right now, it's about categorizing the sort of companies which end up in this sort of situation. And you were talking about companies which don't really have engineering culture. So can you elaborate on this?
Yes, for instance, the main revenue will be within the oil and gas sector. So they would want to build an internal capability to better manage, say, the resources, or to better predict about oil prices, make even better predictions as to the best routes to follow for the vessels. That there is a plethora of scenarios where technology can help improve the workflows and increase efficiency. These companies don't have any expertise within software development. So instead of bootstrapping their own teams, they will just generally go to a vendor, give the requirements, and come up with the idea and ask for a solution to the product. What's interesting though is that these companies have now started moving towards their own digital transformation projects. This is where the need for the internal engineering capability comes from. How do you then go from having your business in sector A to still maintain your business there, but basically empowering solutions that you create in-house? And how do you apply those software development methodologies, the culture, in order to create kind of new business value effectively from your existing one?
Something I'm also really interested here is as well, how do you realize and recognize an opportunity there? Because whenever you make something, you have to make decisions and you always have to rely on vendors. It's really hard to just build everything. But at which point in time do you as a business realize that maybe working with this vendor is not the best thing in the long term?
I think first of all, when an organization gets started on this digital transformation journey, they will need to bring in some external stakeholders in order to be able to better manage some of the projects and to help them plan strategically their goals to move to create their one engineering culture. So there is a need, at least an initial need, for an external force to help the organization go through the difficult first phase. Now, once you go through that first phase and you start building some products, of course, in collaboration with external vendors, then you start changing the mindset, the internal mindset of your, say, product managers or even project managers. They start to be able to recognize how like software development is done, what are the engineering practices that need to be in place. I mean, some of that comes externally, of course, by guidance from different agencies, but that's a typical journey of a big organization. Now, when do you decide to move away? I will say once you have a few products and you have started building your one team. And I think I will draw to an example of my recent project that I'm working on, where we started working on this product maybe 4 years ago. So yeah, around 4 years ago. We got in touch with an external vendor. We got started with the project. This project is a chatbot, and I will give a bit more information about it later. But we got started with an idea with this chatbot. We got an external vendor to initially bootstrap some of the requirements and get to an MVP. And then over the span of, let's say, the next year, where some new features were built in, the organization itself started to kind of assimilate some of that culture back into the organization and moved the project from being handled by an external vendor back to the organization and handled internally. And this is where this good kind of collaboration with external vendors can help, because they can help you get started, and then they can even provide you with the right people to actually continue that project. So this was a good example where we actually been through the journey for quite some time. So I guess back to your question as to when organizations may move away and decide to build this capability internally, I would say is when they have a few products, they've started building them, and they have at least hired a few engineers to get started on this process.
From my perspective, a lot of those changes have to be driven by engineers, and is really key for companies to stay very much in touch with the technical people and the people actually building the products. Because if your engineer doesn't tell you that it's possible to do it for half the cost, then you have no way of knowing. And it's really important to establish this strong relationship and to have an engineering workforce which is of high skills and high level, so that they are aware, they know what are the new technical capabilities and what are the new technical innovation and where the market is.
Yeah, of course, I will completely agree with this. And I will say that the financial incentive in bringing something in-house is something that's tangible and there's benefit. Although arguably overall, you could say that if you add up maintenance costs and like the overhead of managing internal engineering teams, of course, it will always, I think, be lower. But I think the real value is around building basically a culture of like innovation, right? You start building some products and then you have this capability in-house. And when someone spots an opportunity, you can iterate on it quickly because you have the internal resources to do so, rather than trying to get to another contract with another vendor, which often takes months to finalize. Something that I will always say and keep in my mind is that the product is an ecosystem, is not the end result. So if you bring the product development in-house and you build an ecosystem around it, that allows you to go to different directions. You build the capability internally, and then other teams within the organization may start doing the same, because you start having influence within the organization by showing them how you did it, and by having an actual example of something being built in, well, something being maintained in-house, built, of course, with some help externally, but new features and new development can then branch out of that. And maybe a good example that I would like to kind of draw on here is, again, around this product that I'm working on at the moment. So this is a chatbot. This is one of the most popular ones in the oil and gas industry. We solve around 25,000 queries a month, which is quite significant for the amount of load that we have within the chatbot. And as I was saying before, this was first being materialized externally with an agency, but over the span of 1 year, it has been moved on internally. And now that was the one of the most important steps towards bringing this capability in-house. And from then on, we start the phase 2, which is the chatbot is relying on another vendor for the NLP. And now we've started the process of migrating away and building the NLP capability in-house. So we've done it in 2 phases. First, build the product, bring it in-house, get some engineers, get some engineering culture going, and then bring more stuff in-house. And this is basically what we are focusing at the moment.
It also made me realize how much data has become important. And I think this is also very much of a mindset shift, that companies which were previously outsourcing a lot of the services are realizing that bringing in-house enables them to have complete control over this data. And you can see how much of a competitive edge it can bring to companies. An example I have in mind is within the agricultural industry, where most of the OEMs are actually keeping the data for themselves. And so they're selling farmers the machinery, but the OEM is retaining the data. And access and ability to work with the data is still in the end of the OEMs. So when you're in these situations, giving a vendor full control of the service and letting them keep all this data is actually extremely detrimental to you. And going back to the example of the chatbot, your product team's ability to gain control and to maintain ownership of the data is pretty critical, especially from a strategic perspective, if they want to develop and to create additional features on top of this in the future.
Of course, the data that we now are in control in, we can examine the data much better, and we can run our own analytics on that data, so we can figure out where we may have some gaps, not just on this product itself, but sometimes analyzing this data can give you a broader sense of the business. But yeah, it's owning that data, that's quite important. The other thing that's also very important about this capability, and in our case, especially around building NLP, is that we have built this and we have it live, say, in 15 countries. It's something that there and it works, and we can take the same approach and replicate it to solve other business problems. And this chatbot is around solving queries and providing recommendations for lubricants for its users. But there is nothing stopping us applying the exact same principles in another part of the business. Let's say a chat box where you can ask it what's the most efficient route for my vessel to go, or it can give you live predictions of oil data. You can then take this capability and just apply it elsewhere. And this, I think, is where it creates real value. Also, as part of this migration that we're doing from the vendor to in-house, now we're processing everything ourselves and creating serviceable APIs for that data. And now others within the organization have kind of taken notice and they want to start using that data, something which before was not possible, because this data was held and managed by the vendor. If we wanted to do another integration for another product, that would have been kind of a brand new contract for doing something else. But now we have this ability to simply just give them our APIs internally and then start leveraging the data.
So you mean that it's also leading to some sort of cultural shift within the organization itself, the additional capability that it's providing?
Yes, it's building these kind of internal services where just when people become aware of them, they just start seeing patterns. They see, okay, there is that little bit of API there, which gives me this amount of data, which before wasn't there. There's this other thing here, which provides like NLP capability. We have this problem. Can we combine those two services to solve our one problem here? It's something that fosters this curiosity, I think, across the different teams.
So going back to the actual decision of bringing those capabilities in-house, was there a point in time where you decided maybe to evaluate the different vendors and to potentially see how they would compare against each other?
This was done quite early on in the development. We had several different choices to choose from, but ultimately, a lot of these choices were driven by the agency at the time. As basically the organization, although the organization was going to pay for the vendor that provides the NLP, that choice was not necessarily outsourced, but a lot of the technical direction was driven by the agency that was managing the product development. What's maybe a bit more kind of interesting is that now, although we are building on one internal NLP service, we still rely on external services. For instance, we use Dialogflow, which is a SaaS NLP tool provided by Google, and that kind of now powers up the NLP engine that we have in-house. So there's still the element of choosing a vendor, but you choose basically a vendor that you configure. So there is always the element of like trying to choose what's best. But at the end of the day, if you are building this internally, the vendor that you're going to choose is going to be a SaaS, like a modern SaaS tool, and the cost will be much lower. And of course, the ownership of data and configurability and maintainability will be on you to manage. But what I would say is that, especially early on, decisions were made in order to maximize the value as soon as possible. And hence, even if we went with an expensive contract at the time, the value of getting something quickly, getting to an MVP, was more important than the initial costs. But always, we had in our mind that we are going to work towards a plan where things are going to kind of absorbed back to the organization itself.
From a feature and capability perspective as well, do you think that your previous vendor was also unable to keep up with the technology innovation and the new capabilities that we have?
I think that's a good question, because the answer is a bit complicated. But at the time that we started working on the bot, it was around 4 years ago, and the amount of third-party services that existed to help you managing the NLP aspect of your bots, there were not many. There were a few, but there were not many, and they were not mature. So this vendor was actually offering a quite nice service, and a quite mature one. They've used it for other big, they use it as part of other big organizations. So it does give a head start because they were providing a lot more features. And of course, the ability to develop new ones. If we wanted a specific feature, we could ask them to create that for us, a custom solution for us. So that's a big benefit of going with a vendor like this. However, over time, the space, especially around like chat boxes, there was big innovation, and more providers have started appearing. These smaller services, these SaaS solutions, were playing a catch-up game with the vendor that we went at the time. But now it's a bit reversed, just because if you have a SaaS company and that is your primary kind of tool for generating money, you just have to be laser focused on that. Whereas these big vendors are often kind of splitting themselves too thin by trying to serve too many customers at the same time, and too many customers that have specific requirements. So that's in a way kind of the big difference between the two approaches. But definitely now the landscape is much more mature, a lot more choices, and yeah, it's working kind of well for us, and the operating costs are quite a bit lower. Also, there is the infrastructure. All of our services are hosted on GCP, Google Cloud Platform, and the tool that we use, Dialogflow, which handles the NLP for us, is on GCP. So there is a nice integration there. Whereas with some of these kind of external vendors, you may not get as nice integrations as the SaaS tools provide. But of course, it's because the vendor is managing the infrastructure, is not you. But then it creates some friction, especially around DevOps sometimes.
One thing that I'm interested, because so you did go through the journey of transitioning from the vendor into your own service, in-house service. And I'm particularly interested in some of the learnings that you went through this, because it's quite a large migration. It's transitioning an entire capability. And what are some of the major learnings that you actually got through this?
Yeah. I think there are two main things. One is basically how you plan it. There are two approaches. One is an approach where you start matching exactly what you have now, and you do your migration, and at the end, you have exactly the same feature set. And the other approach is you do an audit of all your features, and you are willing to drop some that are not particularly popular with users. This is mainly the approach that we took. We've identified that over time, so we worked with this vendor for around maybe 2 years. So over time, we built quite a few features with them, especially because we wanted to experiment and see what works. But now that we started doing the migration and we did our audit, we found that, let's say 10% of these features are used by less than 10% of our users. And not only that, the experience that they provide is not really ideal. Again, these were done for experimentation purposes. So we've reduced the feature set to be able to do this migration. We had to reduce it to reduce the time as well. But also it gave us a more focused surface area to not to reduce it, but also improve the existing ones. So as we are doing this audit, we even found some of our existing features, although they were good and had good user satisfaction, we found that they had some kind of major deficiencies in areas. And we've only realized it now where we actually dived into the actual details, the technical details. It's only now that you realize that these deficiencies were always there, but before we didn't have this in-depth understanding to see how those features work. Now that we do, we have to have now because we're doing it ourselves. Now we are figuring out that these features can be improved quite a bit. So again, we took some features away for our users, but on the same side, we did improve some of the existing ones. So it's a good balance. Again, we started by trying to first have everything, so migrate all features from now to the future and have the exact same feature set. But yeah, over like 2 weeks, we just found that we shouldn't do that, and we need to be more focused. And I think that was actually a good decision at the time. The other aspect is the other big learning is that because we are in 15 different markets, localization is quite important. And we basically have found that the vendor did quite a bit of work around localizing inputs, around be able to have a multilingual bot. And something we actually missed is how much work and how difficult this is to do. And let's say that we have 15 different countries to serve, 10 of which are English, the primary language is English. Those were done fairly quickly, but the other 5 just took us way more. This is something that we didn't kind of anticipate.
Okay.
We thought that it's going to be complicated, but again, when we did our initial planning, we can never foresee how complicated linguistics can get on that level, especially when you have like different languages that have different alphabets, like Russian, where that has Cyrillic, and well, especially with China as well, different characters there. This was a big learning for us.
So what were some of the complexities, for instance?
Main complexity is that some of our data is kind of all in English, and we get some of the data to get translated, say, to Russian, but in Russian there is 2 different representations for the same thing. There's the I hope I'm saying this right. There's kind of the Latin version, and there is another one that uses Cyrillic characters. And there we just found out kind of the hard way that we didn't have this capability to do this automatically. Take our data and just throw it in and convert it to Cyrillic. And we had to go through quite a few iterations with the different local teams there to be able to get to the data, to the right form. Another complicated one was around deploying in China. Some of the services on GCP are not available in China. They are blocked. So we had to kind of set up VPNs and have some servers in Hong Kong to route the traffic towards our data centers. This is something, again, that the vendor handled for us in advance. So again, the learnings is when you have quite a few markets, just be sure of the limitations of each market. And if you think it's difficult, it's actually twice as difficult.
Okay. In total, how long did it take you to kind of complete the transition?
Yeah, so we started by doing small spikes. The way that we approached it, we started maybe 8 months ago, but we started very small. So we started evaluating some of the technologies, like Dialogflow, see how it works. We did a few spikes with a super reduced feature set. And that initial phase maybe took around, say, 3 months, like the spikes and to get some proof of concepts. Nothing actually workable. Because for this, we needed to build another capability around data handling. This, again, was something that was handled by the vendor before. That one took maybe around 2 months. And the last bit, the NLP, 3 to 4 months. We are due to end of this month. So we are still working on it. So all in all, you could say 9 good months, but 9 good months of work where maybe 6 were like really focused. The other 3 were a bit of experimentation and exploration.
So looking forward, would you have any particular kind of advice to provide to companies who might be looking into migrating some vendor services back to in-house?
Yeah, I think the main advice is to do it in phases. Like we did. First, we transferred like kind of the engineering aspect, like one part of the project that was managed externally. We brought that in and we started managing the project development, the core development in-house. That was kind of like phase 1. And then we did the phase 2 where we just picked different aspects of the application and brought that in-house. So I think kind of have stages is what will work best, especially if you don't even have like the engineering culture within the organization. So first start with that, and then start looking into the individual aspects that you can migrate back in-house. From then on, let's say that you are at the point where you will start evaluating your options, bringing things in-house. From there, really, it's all about your, well, two things. Whether it's actually cost effective, so good planning to see if it's cost effective. Because as I was saying before, sometimes things may look like, okay, it's nice, it's cost effective, definitely it's going to be a lot cheaper, but maintenance overheads will actually add up. So there is that element that needs to be taken into account. But the most important thing, I think, is when you bring something into your ownership, you should not just think about it as just a product. Again, it goes back to that ecosystem idea. If you're bringing something into your ownership, you're bringing it not just for you to maintain and want it, but to be able to leverage it across different aspects of the business. I will say if that's not the case, then you should really think quite a bit whether something is worth bringing in-house. Unless, of course, you want to really get ownership of your data that the vendor has. But it's not just bringing it in-house and having a complete product. It's about you be able to create an ecosystem that can give you more opportunities to improve other aspects of the business. And in our case, actually, that happened. I talked about the data aspect and the fact that we spent around 2 to 3 months creating data APIs. Those data APIs were to be used for our chat box, but they were centered around product data, especially around lubricants. And from that, we've actually built another web app that's using that API to power a different interface for surfacing that data. So now we have our chat box where you can go and ask it questions, and you will get data and recommendations back. But we have a web app where you can find the same data, but in the web app, the data is connected across other services. So it allows you to buy some of those products, or for you to run analytics against those products. So it has accounts, so you can create your account, have your favorite products that you use in your factory, and then you can see performance like over time against those products. It's just that what I'm trying to say here is it did create a real opportunity for us, and we've created another team from this migration for a totally separate product.
Yeah, one thing I like to liken this is that if you go through this process, you're basically becoming a competitor to your vendor. You're actually creating a competitor internally to your vendor. And that kind of comes up with everything else. In the case of your large company, you will not try to market this and you will not try to sell it. You're only using it for yourself. And so it's a smaller set of features. But it's still important to notice that actually you're basically replicating the service that they're providing. And so you're starting to compete against their offering.
Yeah, this is true. This could happen. Although in organizations where this is simply brought in-house to improve the internal capability, I really have a hard time kind of envisioning be able to kind of make this publicly available and becoming a competitor, mainly because the business primary space is not that. And of course, we are building some engineering culture within a broader organization, but I think that will be quite difficult to move from that to, so let's say, another department that can actually sell this to other companies and make money out of it. But it could sometimes give you, of course, the competitive advantage. So you can market it against your other competitors, not the vendor. I don't see it as much of a competitor to the vendor, but you can use that example for your own benefit as an organization to market and show how that differentiates you from other similar businesses, like the fact that we were able to bring this in-house and build kind of a production level service that this other company was providing, and that gave us, let's say, this product, which is this popular chat box. You can kind of market it like this.
It's doing the same thing that companies have been doing for hundreds of years, which is vertical integration. When they decide to replicate a service which is provided by one of the vendors. So final question, just to try to get an understanding of the success or failure of this transition, how did the business receive it?
The business received it quite well because especially now we are at the end of this migration and we have a fairly successful product that is able to demonstrate that it's generating some revenue. So especially now with like, if we think about like this period in time, like with COVID-19 and companies actually restricting their budget, the fact that we are able to move away from a big external vendor and yet another contract to in-house is something that is very welcome from the business. It is definitely going to save quite a bit of money, which can then be directed back to revenue in terms of like savings. But especially that we're lucky because the time is ideal. We are just cutting off another big contract. We are bringing this in-house, and we at this point we are not going to add that much more features to it. So the operating cost of having it in-house and be deployed on GCP is minimal compared to the vendor. So this is all good news for the business. It's also the other aspect where we were able to create another product of this, and this other product has quite a bit of premise. So that's also something that kind of makes the business happy, because we just proved to the business that yes, we brought something in, we've built it, we've maintained it, and we've also created another opportunity of this. So yeah, all is well.
Great, that's really insightful, and I really like this example where by actually developing an in-house product rather than buying it, you're able to cut cost and you're able to increase your development capabilities. Yeah. So that's a great example to companies which are actually thinking about reducing their expenses and which also aim to have a better strategic position in the future.
Exactly.
Thank you very much, Stelios, and I wish you all the best.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Ben. We'll catch up soon.
Cheers.
See ya.